Thank you, Robbie, Brittany, and Geeta for kicking off our virtual convening. I'm Sarah Patterson from McMaster University in Hamilton, Canada, and I'm a member of the meeting organizing committee for this year. It's been so exciting to be part of this, creating this virtual experience for you. I believe this meeting is something we can all be proud of and look forward to our time together this week. I have the great honor of introducing our opening keynote speakers, Mary Holt-Schneider and Dr. Chan Park. Their timely session, Navigating the Interprofessional Learning Environment to Build Resilience, will explore the challenges amplified by the pandemic and societal changes of this past year. Plus, it'll identify ways that simulation educators like us can develop their own resilience and mindfulness skills and model them for our interprofessional learners. Mary Holt-Schneider is a simulation education coordinator and nursing professional development specialist at Durham, North Carolina Veteran Affairs Healthcare System. She also serves as a nursing program manager for Duke University Area Health Education Center, which is part of the North Carolina Area Healthcare Education System, dedicated to educating healthcare professionals throughout the state. Chan Park is the director of simulation education at the Durham, North Carolina Veterans Affairs Healthcare System. He also serves as adjunct assistant professor of emergency medicine. He's a faculty member at the Duke University Medical School Leadership Education and Development Program, and also a senior faculty advisor for the John A. Fegan Leadership Program, all at Duke University Medical Center. Ms. Holt-Schneider and Dr. Park are co-directors of the Durham Veteran Affairs Interprofessional Advanced Fellowship in Clinical Simulation, which is a year-long fellowship program designed to mentor future leaders in healthcare simulation, education, and quality improvement. They also serve together as co-editors for the bi-monthly Interprofessional Learning Environments column for the Journal for Nurses in Professional Development, where they explore emerging opportunities for interprofessional teamwork, communication to impact education, quality, and safety. They speak and write frequently on simulation, leadership, mindfulness, interprofessional education, and how you can use best practices from the simulation education arena to be integrated throughout the healthcare continuum. Both are past recipients of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs Undersecretary for Health Excellence in Clinical Simulation Training, Education, and Research Practice Award. We are so fortunate to have such esteemed speakers here with us today. Welcome to the stage, Ms. Holt-Schneider and Dr. Park.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We so appreciate and we're so thrilled to be here. And Chan, I am sharing right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to different parts of this world. As fellow human beings in this world, we want to welcome you to our talk today, and we are thankful and mindful of the privilege that we've been given. So thank you very much for the hearing.
Yes, and we have no disclosures.
So before we begin, I think all of us would agree that each of us, whichever location we're in, are given somewhat of a vision and a mandate. And we are no different at the Durham VA Medical Center, where Mary and I are full-time employees. And in fact, the VA motto, as some of you may know, is to care for him who has borne the battle and for his widows and his orphans. And Mary and I often sit around and we ask ourselves, who in the healthcare system actually carries out this grave responsibility? Just ask yourself. Each of you has a vision and a motto at your institution, but at the end of the day, who is it that actually bears that burden of making that happen? It's you and I, it's us. It's our interprofessional healthcare colleagues and professionals. And in the VA, we have a mandate to provide world-class benefit and services that our veterans have earned. And so we do so by adhering to the highest standards of compassion, commitment, excellence, professionalism, integrity, accountability, and stewardship. This requires all members of the healthcare team to remain physically, emotionally, psychologically, and intellectually engaged. And Mary and I, we are convinced that the best way to maintain a long-term sustainable outcome such as these is to work interprofessionally.
Mm-hmm. So I really just want to so honor our past year and a half. And when Sarah introduced us, she mentioned about all of the challenges that I think we've all faced really since COVID and all sorts of things going on with society. And Chan and I, as simulation educators, like many of you with us today too, really took the bull by the horns and worked with our simulation talents and our simulation kind of colleagues throughout our health system to make sure that we were meeting the demands that everything kind of changed in that past year and a half. So here are just a few photographs that may look familiar as we all kind of prepared for COVID. And as Chan mentioned, interprofessional really was the key, I think, when we were hit with all sorts of changes going on with our COVID and all the changes that we had to make. So how many of y'all think just back about the PPE issue that we had a year and a half ago and whether we were going to have enough and how to put it on correctly and how to work with our learners to teach them these skills? We obviously have some pictures here of us doing that as well too. Some of our existing processes changed as well, not only just in our hospitals, but in daily life. We learned very quickly that some of the things that we might have taken for granted with even the basics of doing CPR changed. We learned that doing chest compressions was an aerosolizing procedure, and we had to change very quickly. We had to pivot where we always focused on patient safety, and we had to pivot quickly to healthcare professional safety in so many of the things that we did. And so many of us are dealing with still limitation in visitor hours, certainly with our peds population that is huge, and with our adult population as well too. It just changed that entire fabric. And I also recall back to testing areas, screening areas, things that we just were learning, and things were changing constantly by the hour. So much of this caused us to maybe have to look at ways to build our resilience and to really build many of our mindfulness skills. And as Chan mentioned, the whole concept of interprofessionalism, yes, it certainly existed pre-COVID. And during COVID, during this time of just extreme change that we all had to adapt with, and things going on, not only with the professional obligations that we had, but with many of our own personal situations, we really had to focus on where interprofessionalism and teamwork really went, because there were certainly some challenges with it. So I just want to remind everybody about the IPEC 4 core competencies, which Chan and I always focus on in our writing and our speaking. And the IPEC core competencies go back to 2011, where the group of interprofessional education, the pre-professional associations, got together and said that these are the competencies that people have to have before they graduate from these pre-professional schools, whether it's schools of nursing, pharmacy, medicine, you name it. And they were reaffirmed in 2016. Certainly when we look at values and ethics for interprofessional practice, we also look at roles and responsibilities, not only knowing our own roles, but everybody else's roles as well too on the team, interprofessional teamwork and interprofessional communication. So again, these are here. These are what hold us together as interprofessional teams. However, during the pandemic and a lot of the months that ensue, we've certainly seen some breakdowns in this.
You know, Mary's so right. It's nice if everything functions the way it's supposed to. And it would be great for me to sit up here and tell you that at our hospital, we embrace the IPEC core competencies and then live it out. But truth of the matter is when we are not healthy individually, or we are not healthy as a team, different elements of these core competencies start to break down. And in fact, almost all of them at one point or another start to break down. So if we can go to the next slide, our journey today is going to be fivefold. In some ways, it reflects the challenges that I'm sure all of you guys have faced over the course of the last 2 years, if not longer, and still experience on a daily basis. It is a commitment personally as collectively to this idea of growth, awareness, and willing to work together with those around us to achieve a very difficult outcome at times. And in fact, it is so difficult that if you look at the term resilience, I'm sure all of us will have myriad of definitions how we think of resilience. So perhaps one of the things we'll do is define a resilience definition that Mary and I will be using. And maybe it's a chance for you to expand upon your definition or concept of. Second, we'd like to frame this topic around the current workplace and the challenges that are inherent. And I'm sure we're speaking to a population that is inherently working with the pediatric population, and we know how hard and challenging that has even been and is becoming even that much more. But again, in the workplace and the healthcare setting environment, we'll spend a little bit of time looking at the literature and analyzing the literature, the breadth and the gravity of the situation before us. And this is the part that leads to where Mary and I really want to offer some practical strategies that we have worked out over the course of the last 5 years. And we've gotten a lot of feedback from our learners. And so we have morphed this over the course, and hopefully we'll be able to convey to you some nuggets of valuable truth that you can carry on in your workplace. And then share a couple of simulation-based training that we have used at our facility to impart this to our learners. Let's get started.
So Jan, I'm going to reshare for a second here. I was admitting people into the room, and I think it just got a little hung up. So
no problem.
Yeah.
All right. So one of the definitions that Mary and I really love to use is this one by Barry Kubrick. And it says this: resilience is an ineffable quality that allows some people to be knocked down by life and come back, not just come back, but come back stronger than ever. And in some sense, it really is more than a quality. And the reason why capacity is hyphenated or in parentheses is because if we don't grow our ability to improve and engage and grow in our capacity, what happens is what we had gets dwindled away day by day, and we're left with almost nothing. And in fact, in 2018, well before the COVID was a thing, Mary and I were on this topic for years, and we gave a presentation at the International Meeting for Simulation Healthcare in Los Angeles. And I have to confess, this was a late afternoon session, probably like the third day in. And we know how difficult that is to engage anybody at that time. I said, Mary, we'll be lucky if we had 10, 15 people. And Mary's like, well, Chan, this is an important topic. We're going to deliver it. And it was really eye-opening to me, because here we are educating some of the best educators around the world on this topic of learner disengagement, healthcare fatigue, exhaustion, depression, healthcare hostility, and burnout. And what we found interesting was everyone was eager to explore new strategies, because obviously the strategies that we have used thus far was not getting us very far. And in fact, what they wanted to know is, how can we better utilize simulation-based training given the complexities and the time constraints that we are under? And I think all of us can agree, if we had unlimited time, we'd do certain things, but given the limited time and scope of our learners, this becomes a really difficult challenge.
And it so does. And as Chan mentioned, resilience is so important. And we found that several years ago, and we've been on this journey for even several years prior to that. And I just wanted to share another definition, that resilience is a commitment to a design and an attitude and a system that works, even when things don't turn out the way we planned, especially then. And I think we can all relate to that, certainly over the past year and a half. So the other thing that I think is so important, as far as what Chan was mentioning with teaching these types of concepts, is traditionally we've taught things like resilience, mindfulness from a very cognitive or didactic viewpoint. And that's been kind of the way that it's been accepted. And yet that's probably not the ideal way. There's better ways to do that as an alternative, where maybe we use our tools of simulation for really focusing in on how to help us feel and go more deeper into some of these areas here that we can grow in.
The definition that Mary just shared is so important, because it really is a commitment to a design and a system. And in fact, as we have looked through the literature at some of the best educational faculty that are out there, there are kind of recurring themes. One is this idea of a one-shot training that targets awareness doesn't really sustain. You get a blip in excitement, and then it just dwindles away. And the second thing is that if you want something that's going to be impactful for a long-term gain, there were certain principles, and one was behavioral modeling, 2, realistic practice, and then 3, a design that corrects ineffective behavior, and lastly, improving interaction and working relationships. So Mary and I have really worked hard to incorporate that into the type of training to generate kind of an attempt to sustain these changes. So what is the state of the interprofessional learning environment? Well, let me just give you some literature headlines here. We got burnout in the anesthesiology community. Next. We see trauma center nurses that are stressed out and burnt out there. We see bullying, and why are they bullying in the workplace among healthcare employees? It wouldn't be surprising to us that there is a relationship between empathy and burnout and how our empathy starts to dwindle amongst the paramedics. We see this even in preclinical dental students. Where else are we seeing this? We're seeing this among academicians who, for the most part, have been the most resilient component. We see it among pharmacy practitioners. And then we see it in graduate healthcare students across the board. Now, 2020 was a unique year, and yet this issue of burnout, fatigue, stress, resilience issue continues on in 2021 and unlikely will change in the 2022 upcoming year. Why? COVID is one such thing, but I think what COVID did was it truly exacerbated an already exacerbated system that hasn't come up with a defining strategy for a lasting impact on healthcare providers' resilience.
So what is our current state? One of the things that I think is so important for us to honor is the fact that we have had very collective experiences over the past couple years. And there are several things that have been true for all of us. And one of them is that we have experienced some form of lack of trust. And that lack of trust could be in our government, it could be in each other, it could be in our institutions, whatever that trust is. There has been a variety of talk about that. And when we lose trust, then all these other things break down. And that has been so powerful, I would say, as a theme for the past year. The other thing that we can say as well, too, is that we also experienced what was called lack of information, okay? And when we talk about lack of information, I always think back to the beginning days, especially of COVID, when things changed all the time, right? Things were changing, and you know, do y'all remember, maybe it was even hourly that things would change. Things would change, and we're like, oh my gosh, you know, this is different than it was an hour ago, and here we are trying to change our and really morph into our education. So things change, and then all of a sudden, when they're changing, then we also feel that there's a lot of clarity in what it is as well too. And then the other thing that I really want to point out that's so important is what's called lack of control. I actually think this is kind of the circular piece from all of this. Many of us felt and still do feel that we do have a lack of control over some of our circumstances, whether it be in the workplace or society or whatever. And that can cause tremendous strain. So you couple that with the lack of trust and the lack of information or clarity, and it can make all sorts of problems with our resilience. So what we do want to focus on today is how can we really focus more in on having a sense of control and what can we control.
That's great. In fact, if you look at the burnout epidemic, just do a PubMed search and you'll see that the publications start to ratchet up quite considerably towards the latter part of 2018, 19, 20, and it spikes at 2020 to no surprise to anyone. If you look at the terms burnout and type in and COVID and pediatrics, what you'll see is that there's quite a bit that talks specifically to this COVID phenomenon and epidemic. And from 2020 to 2021, even in the pediatric literature and our cursory search, you see there is a doubling of publication just within the past year. And I'm sure there are a lot more that people could write about. It just hasn't been out there in the press. So if we move on here, we look at what COVID has done. It has caused a fundamental shift within our healthcare industries, as well as our healthcare systems and educational system, to look at prevention and emotional wellness. If we look past this one, what you'll see is that when you're facing the pandemic, there are mental health risks that we did not really consider previous to these past few years. If you continue onward, what you're going to find is that when you compare the burnout frequency, you're going to see some spikes amongst different disciplines. Would it surprise any of you that are here today that pediatric nursing has the highest reported burnout rates among all the professions? I don't think this is a recent phenomenon, but it is certainly striking. And during the pandemic, we're going to see allergists and immunologists, traditionally subspecialties that really were some of the happiest people, experiencing similar stresses. We're going to see it internationally in the London experience and the pediatric services there. We'll see it out in different parts of the world. We're going to see it in intensive care units in particular. And we'll see a lot of literature actually coming up in the Middle East, defining and describing similar experiences throughout the world. So this is truly a pandemic issue and an epidemic that is at our doorstep.
So, yeah, so Chan and I are honored and very privileged to be able to co-edit the Journal for Nurses and Professional Development bi-monthly column on interprofessional learning environments. And we are able to explore every other month certainly these issues that impact us in this interprofessional environment. So we invite you to look at some of our articles here as well too. But we've been focusing in the past couple of years a tremendous amount on mindfulness, resilience, and also strategies for elevating the whole interprofessional environment. So as we talk about building resilience, we have what we call our model, kind of our 6-step model. And it's here on the screen, and we have written about that as well too, where when there is something that strikes us as a negative stimuli, whatever it is, these are the steps that we follow: to pause, breathe, identify our emotion, recognize that we have some space between responding and not responding, choosing how to respond, and then responding in a very measured manner. So the first 2 strategies I'll kind of combine here to introduce this, but any negative stimuli, you can think of any example whatsoever. I think many of us now think of road rage or some form of road rage where an individual just gets so completely out of control, all right, that they're very upset. When that happens, they will tell us that many mindfulness practitioners will tell us that the best thing to do is to pause and to breathe. And that takes about 6 seconds to do that, to pause and take a big deep breath and just exhale. And that goes ahead and resets our brain. It resets our thinking so that we don't instinctively react in a negative manner. So Chan, we're going to talk about the science behind that. Mm-hmm. And Chan, can you hear me?
I'm not sure if we lost him.
Okay.
I don't see him on screen, Mary.
I don't either. So let me cover for Chan. All right. So bottom line is, yeah. So basically the science behind that is that when we feel threatened, all right, when we feel threatened, it strikes our amygdala and we go into our fight and flight syndrome. So part of our challenge as anybody, as healthcare professionals, as simulationists, to teach these skills to our colleagues, it's very important that we recognize that as well too, and that we role model that behavior. So I do love that this is also very important to us as well. So when we pause and breathe, oh, so Chan, hello, welcome back.
I'm sorry, folks. My internet dropped out for a second there. Thank you for picking it up, Mary.
It happens. We talked about the amygdala and fight or flight. Okay. So
Mary, can I go back one? Can I go back one on that one?
Go right ahead. Yes.
You know, I think this is really pertinent, and I do want to stress a little moment here. The biochemical reactions that happen in human beings often undoes what we know to be the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And in fact, if we don't recognize that, what we'll find is that ourselves failing at the most inopportune times. And as Mary pointed out, I'm sure, that the prefrontal cortex is where learning and synthesis of information and growth really happens. And all of us have been in that situation where we've been embarrassed, or we've been dismissed, or we've been overlooked, or we've been actually threatened. And what we'll find is that at that moment, before we know it, we're already in the response phase, because when the norepinephrine and cortisol is released as part of our stress response, it floods our cerebral cortex, but it nails our prefrontal cortex and takes it hostage. How long? It depends on each person, but enough for us to actually say something, do something that we regret for a very long time thereafter. So this idea is, how do we control that? Well, we can't help but feel that. But if we can instantaneously recognize that, part of it is controlling our body's instinctive response and holding ourselves accountable to doing what we know is the right thing to do. And so just by, as Mary pointed out, pausing and breathing and forcing yourself to do that, it allows you, hopefully, enough time for you to then respond the way you think you would like to respond. Okay. And so I'm sorry, but I think it's really important because, again, the dopamine release, it gives us that sense of learning and remembering and synthesizing.
Chan, thank you so much for that. It is extremely important, and thank you for that. And I'm glad you're able to get back on. So once that occurs, we've paused and breathed. The other strategy that is so important is to be able to name our emotion. So we call it identify our emotion. And Robert Plutchik was a psychologist who developed what's called the emotional wheel here. And I will credit 6seconds.org is a wonderful site to go to explore this further. And in our example of road rage a moment ago, when we talk about rage, you may notice that that is one of those center emotions there in that core of this beautiful illustration. Rage signifies that the emotions are completely out of control. It's the strongest era of that particular emotion. And if you notice on the wheel, a little less is anger and a little less is annoyance. So Plutchik identified those really solid core emotions as being the most intense, and they're not the ones that you want to stay in for a long period of time because of their intensity, and they tend to have us put on our blinders. Right. But again, these core basic emotions are things that we can learn how to name. And one of the things that we have maybe some challenges in our healthcare professions education is teaching healthcare professionals how to name emotions. So many times we might say that anger, well, what really is anger? Anger often has sadness, or it has frustration or some other pieces to it. And learning how to name that actually helps us feel it. And we call it naming it and taming it, because you can't name that emotion, actually feel it and let it go. It gets stored elsewhere and can come back later as that proverbial road rage that we just mentioned. So you can't name it, you can't tame it.
You know, and I think Mary has taught me so much about that idea of naming your emotion, because it is a discipline in of itself. It is not very easy to do, because most of us are saying, I'm upset. We're used to using blanket statements to describe kind of a general negative, positive mood. And then when you ask, what are you upset about? Then oftentimes you find yourself backpedaling, because what you really meant to say is, I'm frustrated. And then you start asking, what are you frustrated about? Well, maybe it's that you got overlooked or you didn't get the recognition that was due you. So it really is about kind of recognition, a lack of recognition. So once you start peeling the layers, what you find is that there's opportunity for you to then look at what didn't work, and then only to begin that journey towards fixing and to improving it. So strategy number 4, you go back one, Mary?
Yep.
The strategy number 4 is this idea of recognizing the space. If you look there, an opportunity, I don't know how many of you guys have looked at this. When you're in a typically sour mood or frustrated mood, opportunity is nowhere. There's nothing opportune about this moment. In fact, there's nothing to salvage. I just want to get through the day, get out of the situation. But if you're in a mood where you're actually positive or you're looking for something good to happen, you start looking at saying, you know what? Opportunity is now here. There is an opportunity here. Where is it? What is it? What is my opportunity? And this is something that Mary has taught me over the years for me to work on in my personal life with my children, as with my wife, and in the workplace. And I'll show you how this worked here. So if you take a look here, there's a saying, opportunity between the stimulus and then your response. So here I was as a young father, wanting to impart to my daughter the joy of beauty of nature. I called her over to shore this beautiful flower. I had only the best of intentions, only to find out she did not want to come. She was very afraid. She just didn't want to participate in anything I was doing. And at that moment, you could kind of feel that frustration building up because you had such high hopes. And then it just dawned on me, well, maybe I should ask her, Ella, what's going through your mind? Why are you feeling a little bit less than enthused? And she said, well, Dad, what if there's a bee inside and it comes out and stings me? At that moment, I thought to myself, that's actually pretty smart. And I said, well, why don't we pursue this together? I don't think there's a bee in there, but if there is one, it'll sting me first. Well, just that interaction and salvaging it for what it was allows her now to look at the same plant on her own and to explore the beauty that I had hoped that she would explore and find the joy in doing so. And that situation, I dare say, could have been marred if I handled that first situation maybe wrongly, suboptimally. But how many such interactions are we given an opportunity to make a bridge somewhere in our day-to-day walk? If we don't do it right, sometimes we not only regret it, but sometimes we're not really given a chance to go back and do it the right way. And so this is what I'm talking about regarding the opportunity between stimulus and response. The opportunity is now. It's now here. And if we can sense that, I think we'd approach it a little bit differently.
Oh, and that's so true. And the opportunity is also realizing that we are in control of how we choose to respond. So our next strategy, 5 and 6, is actually choosing how to respond and responding. We are in control, right? We can control how we respond. That is the one thing that we can control about anything that's going on externally to us. And some of the things that Chan and I have explored a lot in our writing and our interprofessional learning environments column has to do with how we work with our interprofessional colleagues. And we've done some writing in our current issue, which is the September-October issue, where we talk about the power of words and how we use words and how do we be intentional with words. And one of the things that we've uncovered by talking to our readers and other individuals that work in interprofessional education, that work in nursing professional development, that work with health professions education, is that when we start referring to each other as colleagues, we automatically confer respect on each other, as opposed to when we say that staff in the emergency department, or the, that outpatient clinic again calling or whatever. But then when we start reframing and really saying colleagues, right? Our nurse colleagues, our physical therapy colleagues, our nursing assistant colleagues, our physician colleagues, our nurse practitioner colleagues, our child life colleagues, our individuals who are colleagues in administration, all of a sudden it can really reframe. So we really are exploring that to see how that is resonating. And we're seeing a tremendous amount of discussion with that as well, too. And again, responding is the last piece. So once you've chosen how to respond, you can automatically respond and respond in that intentional manner so that you preserve that relationship. And so these 6 steps can be a challenge. And they have to be in something that we remind ourselves, and it is a practice, it is a discipline to always stick with these 6 steps. I will be the first to admit I find it challenging. I don't always do it very well. However, I think having this front and center about how I respond and how I choose to respond has been so, so important. So Chan and I love using simulation. Obviously, we're simulationists, just like all of us here, and we love exploring different ways to teach. So we've developed with, we want to thank some of our interprofessional advanced fellows in clinical simulation that we've hired. One in particular was a game designer, game developer that helped us with some virtual reality or immersion simulation, where we found that instead of just teaching this information from a didactic viewpoint, we can use experiential. And we've used it on many different types of learners. And there are some very short seconds here that we'll show you. So Jan, do you want to go ahead and address the threat?
Yeah, so this is what Mary and I talk about in terms of trying to create that first person experience and that immersion experience. Because again, our head knowledge says, I know what to say. It's just our behavior that lets us down. And so we wanted to evoke some type of emotional response. We call this the threat that happens amongst various learners within the hospital system.
So imagine you have the VR goggles on, and this is what you're seeing.
This is the third time that this has happened, and you do not return your pages. This is very important. As a matter of fact, I'm writing you up right now. I'm writing you and reporting you to your chief and to your attending. Yeah, I paid your attending, and he's coming to help me out with the patient, so I don't need you anymore.
So no one likes to be written up. And in fact, if you want to get someone really upset, you tell them, I'm writing you up. The next one is called the bully. And the idea really was when people are stressed and fatigued, angers flare. And when they do, it never turns out well. And in fact, spinning out of control would be the expected outcome. And so this is called the bully, to again, immerse and to try to draw out that instinctive reaction from our learners. This is called the bully.
I need you in here now. I need you in here now. This patient needs 1 milligram of morphine stat. Now. What part of stat don't you understand? I need you in here now.
Good.
So again, using this experiential learning has been a great tool for Chan and I to be able to discuss with learners how they are pausing, breathing, identifying their emotion, really recognizing that space or that opportunity between stimulus and response, choosing how to respond and respond. And we can practice that and give a little bit more emphasis, I guess is a good word to say, rather than just a didactic experience about it. And certainly the VR piece is awfully helpful for many of you who've done that as well too. And I do want to just quickly add here that Tackling the Tough Questions is one of our current columns. It's actually from the summer. And we have want to thank our JMPD colleagues, our editors, our publishers, really, for the journal. It is published in conjunction with the Association for Nursing and Professional Development, AMPD, and I want to thank Brittany Dahlen for also introducing us to all of this as well here too with this conference. And they are opening up our columns till the end of the month, and they want to make sure anybody who doesn't have access through their work or whatever, that you can go ahead and see some of the things that we're writing about, and we'd love to hear your perspective. So there's several columns there that JMPD is opening up, so we really do want to thank them. So Chan, anything else before we have maybe some conversation here?
No, I think this is a real great privilege for both Mary and I to speak to this community. You guys have a tough job ahead of you, and it's been tough, and it probably will get tougher. And so we're looking to hear great things and learn from you as well.
Yeah. So Sarah and Geeta, anything that you guys would like to add, or from the chat, we would love to discuss.
No, thank you so much for such an amazing talk. There's lots of chatter in the chat that has been amazing if you get a second to read. But
Okay.
We'd like to open it up for some quick questions that haven't been in the chat or comments that you guys want to bring up now.
It's audience time. Keep your questions coming.
Yay. Mm-hmm.
And I see a lot of words like encourage authenticity, and I love that. This idea of civility saves lives. It seems like this community is very much in terms of relational, and I think that's something that's beautiful about the pediatric community. They're just so considerate and tight, and this is great.
Fantastic.
I think Brittany asked a great question.
From...
Brittany,
Sorry,
go
Sarah.
ahead, Geeta.
Yeah, no, I was just looking at Brittany's question. She's asking, how might you recommend people practice pausing if they're not skilled in this?
Yeah. Oh, that is such a great question. You know, I think it goes back to what we were saying, that it really is a practice. It's not something that you can just cognitively teach somebody and whatever. It's you have to practice it. Just like mindfulness, just like Pilates. I teach Pilates, yoga, all of that stuff. It's a practice. It's a daily practice. And I think the other piece that's so important is ability to forgive yourself if you don't do it all of the time, because again, it's a practice. So we're never going to be perfect with it. And I think being able to role model that behavior is very, very important as well too, which is one of the reasons Chan and I love talking to our simulation and our educator audience about this as well too, because we do role model for our learners, don't we? And I think that that's a really good way to do that.
Yeah, Mary brought this up earlier, and that is, this behavior modeling is so important because this isn't head knowledge anymore. And I think I saw in the chatterbox, I know what I'm supposed to do. It just, at that moment, it doesn't happen. Well, the moment comes and goes. And if you said something mean, or you dismiss someone by your posture, or worse yet, maybe just ignore them, the damage is done. No amount of words will go back and undo what you just did. And so going back to your question, this idea, we want to evoke some kind of that response in these videos. Yeah. And we want them to experience that multiple times, enough to say, you know what, I'm just gonna give myself a few seconds, just sit there, almost as if I'm numb to it. That in of itself might save you an enormous amount of ground that you would have lost if you spoke instinctively. And so the person that says, well, how do I practice breathing? As Mary said, you just got to do it. You just keep your mouth shut and just sit there. And you will breathe faster than you want to, but this is deep breathing, where you deep breathing, like really deep breathing. And what you'll find is, on the one hand, your righteous anger might accentuate, but there is a little bit of modicum of decency that hopefully will overcome that instinctive, draw first blood kind of a response. And I think therein is what you salvage the relationships through those moments.
So important. I want to honor these comments are wonderful in the chat. There's a comment from Heather that talks about how kids now are learning this, and many child psychologists are teaching kids this whole power of emotions and emotional regulation, whether they have ADHD or any other type of challenge as well too. And I think that that's so important. And I'm so thrilled that we're teaching kids this now. We have heard that over the past couple of years, that it's quite the thing. Many of us did not grow up learning that though. So hopefully there will be change as we move on in life.
What's really interesting is Mary and I talk about the interprofessional learning environment. Certainly it involves different professions, age groups and the likes. Yeah. But we're really basing this on this idea that, when your training content focuses on similarities among individuals, be it trainees, providers, healthcare workers, the more overlap that there is in that similarity, the more engagement there is amongst the community. So if you say this is a training just for resident physicians, or this is a training for just the PICU nurses, what you do is you actually undermine the value of your training.
Yeah.
Whereas if you create a common experience, whether it be a frustration, misunderstanding, or disrespect, or something of that we can all identify with, then you start to get an interprofessional agreement that this is worth exploring. And that may be what sets this to be a long-term gain for your community.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we are coming to the end of the session, but not end of the conversations. We can continue this conversation. I'm sure we can stay the whole day. Thank you so much for being here. And so we are moving into the networking session now. So those who want to continue the discussion, please stay in the networking session with the keynote speakers. On behalf of IPSS Organizing Committee, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Such a important talk, and it's amazing. It's just mind-blowing listening to you. So let's continue the chat in the networking session. So join us soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What a great way to kick off the conference. You can continue the conversation during our networking and meet the keynote segment up next. Join a special interest table or start your own group in one of the open networking areas. At this time, we will begin a 30-minute break and encourage you to grab another cup of coffee and start to connect with sponsors and attendees.
Hey, Brittany.
Hello, thank you so much, Mary. That was a wonderful talk.
Thank you so much for calling and asking us. It's just been marvelous. And kudos to you on the AMPD talk too. I haven't emailed you on that yet, but kudos.
Oh.
It was excellent. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you so much, all of y'all, for Sarah and Geeta and everybody, and Monica and Jennifer. It's just been great. And thank you, everybody who's in the room here. We are so thrilled that you were able to participate today. And Shannon and I are thrilled to have been here. And I know he has exited, right, Sarah? Yes. And I think he exited.
Yeah, he had to go at one, right?
But,
yeah.
but he had to exit on purpose right now. So
yeah, he didn't leave you high and dry. No, he had to go.
No, he didn't. That we had agreed on that. So
is he pausing for 6 seconds?
Yes. You know, you never know when people get knocked out of a session like that, right? Inadvertently, the internet goes down. So
yeah, and so that's why you have to be resilient of all the things that you just taught, right? And mindful and just go with the flow, right?
You kind of have to do it. Yeah. But thank you all so much. So
oh my gosh, loved it.
Mary, I have a question for you if it's okay.
Please. Go right ahead, Geeta.
I'm curious to know what made you take this journey of building this interprofessional learning environment. It's so amazing.
Yeah. So
what inspired you to?
Yeah. So there's a couple reasons. So Chan and I love doing this, and we've been co-directing the Interprofessional Advanced Fellowship in Clinical Simulation since 2014. So we've had fellows for a number of years now where we've been teaching interprofessionally. Prior to that, I was on one of the original interprofessional groups. It was 2007, 2008, 2009-ish, that era. I taught and ran our simulation program at the Duke School of Nursing, and we had a grant with the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So it was Duke and UNC, and it was the School of Medicine, Schools of Nursing, and we had a grant where we did interprofessional simulation education with the nursing students and the medical students. And back then, that was a big deal, right? So I began falling in love with it and have just been so enamored by interprofessionalism ever since then. I was not taught that way. I was educated in the 90s. It was very siloed. So I love the way that we're doing education now. And I know Chan and I are very focused on wanting to bring it not just in the academic sense, but to the clinicians, right? So many clinicians were educated prior to the whole interprofessional collaborative, the IPEC Interprofessional Collaborative from 2011 when it started. Many of them go back to the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s. So we're trying to bring that into as much as we can with our fellowship and with just our daily writings and our work. And so we just really want to honor all that work that's being done. And we know that the PEDS community does it very, very well. And I think that many people can learn from that PEDS simulation community.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Well, we're in networking now. We're just waiting for people to come in. So we're in Meet the Keynote, but a few people have come in. I think they're like last because they weren't sure, but it's just starting now. So hopefully, Mary, we'll have some more people come right now.
That's absolutely fine.
So we can chat too. We have lots of questions.
We can all
for
chat.
you anyway.
Yeah, we can all chat.
What was hitting me was that in child life, which you know, child life from Burns, we teach kids to breathe constantly and be like loose like spaghetti. So the IV, like we know the science behind it, but some reason we never. And I remember like in 92 being a child life specialist and people laughing at me when I'm trying to get kids to breathe, or, you know, you can't cry if you're breathing well, right? Or blowing bubbles, you can't cry. So we would induce kids to blow bubbles without them even knowing they were deep breathing. But now I loved how you guys explain the science. When I took a mindfulness course, when I saw the science, how the body works, that's when it hit me. And I think that is so important for our learners and people in the medical community, because it's not this mindfulness guru thing anymore. It's science. It's real science. And for some reason, we know if we pause, it makes a difference, but nobody does it. So we do sims all the time where we're teaching child life specialists how to do it with kids, but why aren't we doing sims to teach us how to do it? You know?
Right. We've got to learn how to do it. And I think the other thing too, and I'll give more kudos to our fellows that we've learned from in the past, but Chan and I have had 2 chaplain fellows, and both of those fellows have been very instrumental in helping us learn about mindfulness and resilience and the emotions. So just like one of our fellows worked a lot with us on our virtual reality, we had another that really focused on the emotions. And I'll tell you, I learned a tremendous amount about what emotions actually were by that whole wheel and studying it and being able to name it, which is a piece of emotional intelligence, being able to name your emotion, not just say, oh, I'm feeling blah, right? But I feel anger, I feel surprise, I'm feeling joy. So it's all so important.
So we have a question in the chat, and Christine, like everyone here, feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your camera so we can have as if we were in person at conference, we could have a conversation. So Christine, I don't know if you mind asking your question again. I
love this. I'm reading it. Yes, Christine, please go ahead. You're muted. You're muted, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I said, thank you so much for this presentation. I know we have to figure out mute myself, not mute myself, but I am part of the pediatric residency program in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Right. And recently I've been doing a lot of talks about second victim phenomenon with our residents, with our nurses. And I mean, a lot of the literature, like you said, is really focused on those pediatric nurses. And so I was just wondering, because we're trying to figure out how to reframe our safety rounds and creating that second victim model. But I really like how you're putting this positive spin on it and putting it into resilience rather than a victim, because I feel like that's where the controversy comes from and nobody wants to be a victim.
Oh, no.
No. And so has there been a model of incorporating this resilience model into safety rounds and patient safety investigations, just to make sure that we're addressing the provider in addition to the institution and our patients?
I think that's a great question, and I do not know of anything specific. I think that is a wonderful suggestion about incorporating it. And, I think if you look at some of our articles from the journal, we have different discussions about ways to implement this in the teaching environment. So I would love it if maybe you'd look at some of those and also email us and see, what some of your thoughts would be on how you do this. I do want to really honor what you said too about the word victim. And it goes back to that whole power of words thing that we talked about. When anybody calls themselves a victim, they've automatically given up any control of anything, right? So we really believe that that the teaching about that every person has the power to respond. That's the one thing that they can control. They can choose how to respond, and then they can respond. And that gets rid of any victim mentality, which I think is very damaging to individuals. So, right. Christine, I would love it if you explored that further and let us know. I think that's a fantastic idea, reframing it and incorporating it.
All right, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vijayanand Jamal Puri has a question. Vijay, would you like to ask?
Hi, Mary. That was an excellent talk. I'm Vijay from India, from PD Stars and Rainbow Children's Hospital as well. I'm a neonatal pediatrician and also simulation enthusiast.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's a great talk. My question is that you have shown the great examples of these bullies and the threats. And you see them all around. And sometimes you become one of them as well, because the behaviors are infectious. So the challenge is, how do we go about it? And in a culture or in a situation, I'm not talking about just, when I say culture, not necessarily India, across. I was in UK and New Zealand as well. when you look around these people around you and you feel, oh, this is not right, this is not right, you cry inside. But how do I go about it? I'm going to use your 6 point whatever the strategy is, but any thoughts about it? I just want to hear from you, Mary.
Yeah, no, I love that question because it really is everywhere. And I think that's one of the reasons that Chan and I really love this talk and writing about it, is that we cannot control anybody else. And once we've realized that we can't control anybody else, but we can control our own behavior and role model that, and that positive role modeling, then the goal is that that spills over into others. And especially all of us here as simulation educators, right? We're somehow involved in simulation, we can really role model that. And we go back to some of our quotes that we'll use sometimes is, if you want to change someone else, change yourself, right? And how we respond to things. And, it is really funny because I have taught situations where something has happened and somebody has noticed, oh, wow, you paused and breathed there for a second. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I guess I did instinctively, right? Or whatever. And then the other thing I think that happens too is once we teach this with learners, we'll go through a whole Kirkpatrick's level of evaluation as well too. And we did not get into that today, where we have, the learner satisfaction and the learning and then the behavior change. So we'll talk with learners about what behaviors you can change over the long term. And then we do go back and ask them if they have experiences or examples that they can share with us, whether it's, on the road where they controlled their road rage, or in a clinical area or something like that. And that sharing of information and that experiences, I think, is another way to help us with our practice and maintaining our daily practice. But I think once we realize we can't control anybody else but ourselves, wow, it's an amazing, liberating feeling. And then the other thing is, once we realize that we are not victims, then that's also very, very liberating. So I hope that helps.
No, that's great. It does. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary. Tom, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes. Hey, Tom.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm enjoying this discussion. I just was thinking about mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy, and both of those are disciplines. So if you're doing them and engaging in them, it takes work because your brain doesn't like to learn new stuff, right? So as I'm trying to think through this, I'm like, well, if you get the discipline down to a habit, then these things affect culture. So I'm just wondering, like, simulations role in like some sort of deliberate practice way, because sometimes people will go to this and they'll get it and then they'll go back to their habits. Have you looked into kind of sustainability through mindfulness or CBT?
Yeah, so I love that you bring up CBT and mindfulness, because they are all different, and we do incorporate that a lot with our learners. And I think the thing is, it goes back to that concept of practice, right? So how do we help people engage in that practice? So, the things about once something is done specific amount of time, it becomes your habit and it becomes normal. I think we've had some luck with many of our learners, and I think certainly Chan and I have had luck with ourselves, and maybe some of our fellows and some of the other interested individuals in exploring this. I think it's a broader question as far as how do we teach this and how do we make sure that it is sustainable. It's tough. It's very, very tough. I'll give you a side thing. I also teach Pilates. I've been teaching that for a while now as well too, and I incorporate a lot of those principles into the practice as well too, because it's our body, mind, spirit, the whole thing. So one of the things that, and we didn't get into a lot of this today either, but mindfulness it's the mind, yes, but how do we incorporate that body, mind, spirit into everything as well too? Because if things are off in one of the three, then it's going to be off as a holistic piece and whatever. So I think there's many avenues to what you're saying, Tom. And I appreciate all of this conversation, and I think that there are things we can do as simulationists in this community, to really move some of this forward. And again, I would invite you read some of the stuff that we've written as well too. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. We're constantly writing and presenting because we want others to help us engage and to really move this forward. And I wish Chan and I knew everything. We do not know everything, and we learn so much when we engage in conversation like this. So please let us know. And that's for everybody. We really want to engage the community in all of this and learn with and from each other.
I'm just checking any other questions or any other hands. Brittany, Sarah, can you see?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
Christine, absolutely love to. Yeah, thank you, Christine.
And I liked Brittany's idea of using everything to also to work on implicit bias with mindfulness too. I love that idea.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, that's really great.
So I'm going to give another plug for the Journal for Nurses and Professional Development. We have columns now that we're writing about interprofessional implicit bias. And we have some wonderful situations that we've worked on with our readers as far as not just diversity, equity, inclusion in the sense that it's being talked about, but interprofessional. So how do we respect each other's and in the team? And we have some situations where it's been brought up many times where some individuals have been upset when they are a nurse and someone who's not a nurse gets mad that they're mistaken for a nurse. We call it mistaken identity. And I think that's in the current column in September and October. And so we explore the whole concept of why would somebody be upset to be mistaken for a nurse? A nurse is a wonderful career. And then we start digging deeper and deeper. And it's not that that an individual doesn't like nurses or doesn't see nurses as highly professional. It's because of that female stereotype, which maybe goes deeper and deeper sociologically. And we also have some other we call them microaggressions in that sense as well too in the interprofessional learning environment, where we've had other readers we've engaged with, and I think that was in the last column over the summer, where there was some readers getting upset because some people are referred to as doctor, some are referred to first name, some are referred to as last name, some are referred to Mr., to Miss. And the thought was, why don't we have something where everybody is referred to in the same manner? So if we call somebody doctor, let's call somebody else Mr. or Ms. or professor or chaplain or something, so that everybody's given the same title. And that goes with whatever profession, purpose, patient, family member, whoever, that we confer respect in the same manner on everybody. I'm a big proponent in first names. I feel that that's a great equalizer. However, not all workplaces agree with that. So one of the things we suggested too is maybe last names. Hey, Smith. Hey, Jones. Hey, Patel. Hey, whatever. Right? That's another way that some people have dealt with it. So we kind of deal with a lot of different microaggressions in the interprofessional learning environment. And I'd love your thoughts on some of that as well too, because that can trigger our emotions, can't it not? Right? When somebody maybe doesn't give us the respect that we think they deserve, or maybe somebody thinks they make a stereotypical kind of remark about us. So I'd love your thoughts on some of that as well too.
Yeah, I really appreciate you speaking to this, because I think that it's really something that our community at IPSS is talking about a lot. There's a lot of great content in our program coming up that's focusing on microaggressions and on equity and inclusion work. Yeah. And I think it's so true that we have to come up with, and maybe it's within each community, within each institution, but coming up with what kind of language shows dignity and respect, right? What kind of language, what does somebody want to condone dignity and respect to them? I know one of the things that I really try to strive for is when I'm meeting someone for the first time, I default to trying to start at kind of the highest level of of acknowledging their expertise. And then if they tell me, oh no, you can call me Tenzing, for example, then I say, okay, I'll call you Tenzing. But I find that that's helpful, but I appreciate your calling out. It's nice to have some kind of common language. I think that language is so important to try to come up with some sort of shared mental model, as we like to say.
I love that. Oh, Brittany, that's so fantastic. I love how you said that, the dignity and the respect. And again, I do want to focus in on the colleague piece as well, too. If we start referring to each other as colleagues rather than those respiratory therapists down the hall, or those nurses down the hall, or those doctors in the ED, or people like, it's amazing. And Chan and I have had numerous discussions about this, that our physician colleagues are very good about calling each other colleagues, where many other professions are not. And I think it's one of those things that maybe we can all strive for, is to really call each other colleagues and think of each other as colleagues. And then it can kind of elevate that. So
I love this, Mary. You also made me think of something else. Well, and as someone who literally plays for a living, like that respect I had to work hard over my career for that. But the other thing we've been doing in simulation is is teaching our students, and this aligns with everything you're saying, which is fabulous. Mindfulness and taking a moment when a child says a microaggression. So how do we developmentally respond to children?
Yes.
Rather than staff, because we're in those situations quite a bit as child life with kids in the moment. And when they say something, how do our students react? And how do you developmentally also appropriately, if you're with other staff, role play that or just model that for everyone around you? But that also takes a lot of mindfulness and stepping back in the moment and everything you talked about, resilient, because you want to initially, school the child right away, but is that appropriate? Is that appropriate for that family? Is that appropriate in the moment? So all of those things to think about too, within what you're talking about.
So Sarah, I just so want to thank you too for that, because we will be talking about this microaggressions at IMSH in January, whether it's live, virtual, I'm not quite sure yet, but I know they're still thinking live. So I hope to get to meet some folks. But that piece that you mentioned, I think I would love to incorporate more that the pediatric, sense for that as well too, because we're actually talking about microaggressions, and I love how you talked about that modeling and how you respond. I think that's so fantastic, because we don't often think about that, do we?
No. So in our interdisciplinary team at the university, so we teach doctors, nurses, everyone, we throw them in these sim situations where they have to take everything medical out of the situation, like you and I talked before, Mary. Yeah. And we throw them in where a teenager will say these kind of things, because we can't use children, but we also role play it with children, like on our own. We video and use our own children for some of these situations. And we found it's really tricky for people in the moment. So everything you've taught us today would make such a difference for people in those situations where, that's why simulation is so great, is that you can make these mistakes, whereas if you make these mistakes in person, they have huge repercussions.
Oh my goodness. So true. And that's why we love simulation, isn't it? That's why we all love this stuff. Yeah, we love being able to do this.
Yeah. That's why we always say, how often do you get to ask a family, like, how did that go for you? Did what I say make you feel safe? Did what I say, because that's the whole psychosocial care piece, is beyond the medical. Is like, when do we ever get to ask someone, was that good for you? So.
That's so great. I love that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mary. Vijay has one more question, or was it agreeing to Sarah?
I was just thumbsing up, and yeah. So I think
I think all thumbs up for Mary and
for you all too.
Absolutely. I mean, role modeling is so key. Saying that the psychological does not make it psychological safe.
Right.
And creating that environment and showing that and making them feel is the thing. And I thank you, Mary, and also Chan. I mean, you again, a lot.
Thank you,
we talk about physical safety, but when do we ever talk about emotional safety for families? And that's what you're doing, Mary. Yeah. You're making those situations emotionally safe for colleagues, for patients and families. And that's so important, because we always hierarchy, the physical part over the emotional part.
Mm-hmm. That's all important. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.